Hey guys, what's up? Nate here. So part of what I do to help people scale is by building the right digital infrastructures on the back end in order to create that clear path to scale to seven figures and beyond. Part of my first initial evaluations with my team is looking at a company and seeing, how quickly we can scale them from 6 to 7 figures and then be able to create a long-term growth strategy to be able to potentially scale them to 8 figures and beyond. And so some of this requires that back end business development and digital infrastructure building. And then the other end of it requires somewhat coaching on the side of the client and being able to guide them in the decisions to make and to be able to set up the right systems and have those in place in order to scale and be able to have really aggressive growth. Now, because the thing is that there's still a lot of people out there and a lot of businesses that don't believe that they can make seven figures in their business when it really just comes down to having those right systems and having the appropriate formulas in place. And so today for you, I want to break down the initial steps that we take. There's kind of three initial steps in order to build a growth strategy or evaluate a client when coming into looking at how can we scale them quickly and aggressively to seven figures and beyond. So we're going to go through that. But first, if you love receiving the most recent and up-to-date marketing news and you just want to be a better entrepreneur and learn better digital infrastructure, make sure that you just smash that subscribe button down below. Thank you so much. All right, let's go ahead and let's dive right into it. Now, I want to preface this video by saying that literally every business is different. Everyone is in a completely different position. So by no way, shape, or form is any video on YouTube going to guarantee that you are going to scale to 7 or 8 figures. There's no video that you can watch that's going to absolutely guarantee that, and I can't guarantee it in this video. But rather, these are the steps that we typically take in evaluating a client and starting up a client in designing their scaling strategy. And I think that these will help you too if you evaluate your business in the same way and your position in the same way and be able to look at what you're doing and be able to help you scale to 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, or wherever you are trying to get to. Now, this video, there's going to get a lot of information in this video. The timestamp is down below if there's something specific you want to see. I'm going to break down, just a strategy first, and then we're going to dive into some crazy numbers. There's going to be a lot of information there. And then we're going to talk about just branding strategies and how we look at it that way and how you can implement that into your business. So let's go ahead, let's get right into it. And so the first thing to understand, especially when we're looking at a new client, is the client and business history. So when someone comes to me or when I'm evaluating a business, not everyone is in the best position to scale. It doesn't mean they can't eventually. It doesn't mean that it's not possible, but not everyone is in the best position. Remember this, the fundamentals of any scaling strategy or business growth or building require capital, the right personnel, a branding or scaling strategy, and actual timelines for enacting that strategy and actually doing it. And so capital is really important to have on the front end in order to be able to invest and at the same time be able to lose some capital in that investment. So I come from everything from a finance perspective. And the reality is no matter what you invest in, even if it's in the stock market, you, in essence, give up some of that money off of the top end. Now, sure, you can pull it out of the stock market, but again, if you look at your account, the account, in essence, goes down, but the same equity is still there. Now, we typically recommend when going into something like scaling that if you're hurt by losing 5,000 to possibly 15,000 or more, I would say it's depending on what level you're at. If you're still at the 10 to 15 to 20K in revenue a month, be prepared to lose about 5,000. And then if you're in the higher ranges, maybe 50, 60, 75, 80,000, and you're trying to scale to that maybe 6 figures and beyond very rapidly, you want to understand that there is going to be some loss there in the beginning. I would say of around 5 to 10,000. Now, if that's stressful, you need to have that in order for the scale to not be stressful and just to understand that there is going to be just initial data gathering off the front end there if the proper systems and structures and marketing plan is not set in place yet. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to set that money aside, but it's something that you just have to be mentally there. Because to understand, it's not a direct loss, it's an indirect loss. So what I don't mean is that you're just kind of throwing 5K or 10K or 15K into the wind and it's just bye bye, gone forever. But what I mean is that maybe you're spending 25,000 in ad spend and you're making 20,000 in revenue. So it's not a necessarily a direct loss. You still come away with data that can be very important data to help you scale, but it's just something to understand in the first 30 to 60 days or so that there's a very high possibility that there is going to be some money lost on the front end. Probably not going to break even in month one, potentially to month two, but typically in month two is where we find that after about 30 days of spending, there's so much information you can figure out in 30 days of spending. So I would say typically about month two is where you can actually expect something like break even and actual rapid gradual scale, depending on how much capital. Again, this is where capital becomes so important because that's going to determine how much data you can get off that front end and then how quickly you are able to scale. And so, we evaluate business history over the past 60 to 90 days. And that's kind of how I think that you should evaluate your business in order to understand just the whole idea of a proof of concept. We're typically looking at the minimum for about, I'd say at the very, very lowest amount, about 25,000 over the past 60 days in terms of revenue. Ideally, I would love to see more between, 25 to 50,000, maybe a little bit more over the past 60 days. But I would say if you can look back and if you can see those reasonable numbers, and like I said, depending on the position where you're in, even if you're, maybe 30 days, if you're only 30 days in and you've already made, 10,000 or so, well, you're probably in a really good position to start that gradual scale up to, multiple five figures and then beyond. But at the same time, we're looking for just that overall history in the beginning to make sure that there is a proof of concept and that there's an offer that's actually generating revenue. Because the reality is that your store is most likely going to be rapidly scaled by just a couple of SKUs, just a couple of items. It's not going to be, 100 items, each getting a couple of sales. I know stores that have made millions upon millions of dollars off of like 3 products. It's not improbable to make a couple $1,000,000 off of 1 to 2 to 3 products. You don't need to have a store with 100 products in it, like I see so many stores doing, but really it just comes down to having that proven concept inside of that offer, and we want to see that over the past 30 to 60 to 90, to preferably around 60 to 90 days is the time frame that we're looking at. And now you can really look at your business to see what is your proof of concept and your offer and making sure that you have that. Because remember, if you know your market, it just comes down to that offer. You don't sell the product, you sell the offer, you sell the features, the emotion. That's going to be the most important thing in being able to scale to at least $1,000,000. And it doesn't take that long. I think our fastest scale up to 1,000,000 is, I believe it was 48 days. It's between 48 and 75. I can't remember the exact number, but that was the fastest one. And so it's very possible because, again, it just comes down to a formula, but also having the capital and having those right systems and structures in place. And so we want to make sure that there's something of that essence coming in, that there's some proof of concept, and that the client themselves understands the idea of investing. I mean, like I said, we come through most of these situations like financial advisors, and make sure the client's in a good position, that they understand what it takes to grow and scale, that there's a very high possibility that they're going to lose a little bit of money off the top end, but it's not money lost without receiving anything in return, but it's just money that you have to be comfortable with losing, depending on what position that you're in. It totally depends on what position you're in. I mean, if you're already somebody who is doing, 50K and you're only spending 20K a month, well, then you're in a great position for hyperscale, and you already have a really simple proven concept that it's going to take a couple of back-end systems, hiring the right personnel, and then being able to create a funnel structure that's able to scale. So like I said, this is why it all comes down to your position, but evaluate your position, evaluate, what current data that you've received so far, and make sure, and this is something that we help coach. Like I said, it's part of the systems end, but on the actual client end and coaching them, making sure that the proper manufacturing is set in place, making sure that, what are the returns? This is something maybe you have made revenue, but how many returns are you having, or how many defaulted products are there? Being able to keep up with orders and being able to get consistent average order values. We help with all of those things because when it comes to scaling, it's not just about running Facebook ads and running YouTube ads, but having a proper strategy in place and being able to coach and grow a client. So now what I want to do is I want to move into actual numbers. I want to break down exactly kind of how we look at goals and determine goals and how we're actually able to scale. I'm going to break this down number by number for you on what an actual KPI or goal sheet is going to look like, and we're going to go through the formulas. All right, so let's head over to there now. All right, guys, so really quick, I'm going to break down just some really simple numbers just to kind of look at a goal setting formula for determining how that you can scale to 7 figures, where you can look at things like spend and what your actual goal metrics and KPIs need to be in order to reach that number. Now, hopefully you have a little bit of history on the back end so that you are able to look at this and be able to put some accurate numbers in here. This is kind of a changing document. We kind of start with a goals, and then we kind of change it as time moves forward and evaluate it week to week, day by day, week by week, month by month to evaluate the most accurate numbers. It's very simple. It's not meant to look beautiful. It's just meant to break down the numbers for you so that you can see it. So I'm going to bring, because the one we use is way bigger than this and it's a lot more complicated. And so that would just take forever to go through. But these are the most important numbers to look at off the front end in order to determine, like I said in the last segment, talking about capital and the actual numbers that you need to hit and you need to figure out in order to scale up to those levels. So I typically like to start with this section first before even going into revenue and profit margin. But in this section, it's going to be mainly focusing on profit. Revenue is very, very misleading. When it comes down to it, I'm more interested in the idea of cash flow and profit margin than I am in revenue. If you want to say, well, how do I want to make my first $1 million? Okay, well, do you want to make your first $1 million in revenue, or do you want to make your first $1 million in profit? Because both of those are going to be completely different things. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping our head straight when we're looking at something like revenue and profit and just day-to-day cash flow and how that works, because that's going to determine and it's going to help us set better goals in getting up to, where we actually want to be at. All right, so I kind of pre-filled in some of these numbers here. So I'm going to go through each one of them together. So this whole thing is based off of spend. That's the first number that I start with. So this is just something that I filled in as $40 here. And so the next thing would be the cost per click. This is something that we can really easily figure out by taking our CPMs. This is something that I just filled in myself as well. I filled it in as $25 just to throw in a goal CPM. If you already have some data, throw in your CPM there, your overall account CPM, and then take that to be able to use that. And so you take that and you divide it by your click-through rate. And so what you need to do is you need to take that, and first you need to divide this by 1,000 to make it into a percent, and then divide it by the click-through rate in order to be able to get an actual solid number. So if you take $25 divided by a 2.5% click-through rate, well, that's going to get you $1 cost per click. So that's something that we can really easily figure out, and it's the same metrics that we're going to find in the actual ad account itself. Now, I wanted to look at conversion rate here as well. This is just something that I pre-filled in because this is something that you can find off of any client management system that you're using, whether that be Shopify or whether that be WordPress, whatever sales system you're using. You should be able to find out what your conversion rate is. 2.5% is a reasonably good conversion rate. Average is probably going to be 2 to 3, but obviously accounts can be much higher. There can be variables there. But I assume for this example, a 2.5% click-through rate. And by the way, this was actually a client. So all these numbers here, these are numbers that I remember off the top of my head for a client that we did a while back. And so these are all real numbers. This is a real company. These are real numbers that we evaluated at the time. And then I was able to just remember and plug these numbers in here. All right, and so the next number I like to evaluate is the actual cost per acquisition, because that's going to be very important in determining what your actual costs are and the goal that you actually need to hit for the actual account itself. And so that's really easy to calculate. All you do is take your cost per click, you actually divide it by your conversion rate, and that is going to give you a cost per acquisition based upon that. And so again, not a very hard metric to do, and it's something that, again, is going to vary based upon different steps in the funnel and whatnot, but in an overall account, what we're looking at here is if you take just a 1% click-through rate, C8, we can look at the formula here, and you divide that by H9, which is your conversion rate, that gives you a $40 cost per acquisition. The other thing I determined here was visits. So this is something that's an actual formula. And so for that, all you have to do is take your spend and divide it by your cost per click. And that is how many visits that you get from this amount of ad spend. So that's going to be something that's important because it helps us determine the rest of these numbers here. And so units sold, and this is why it's important, because if you look at the actual units sold itself based upon this spend, it's E9, which is the visits multiplied by the conversion rate. And so if you take that, your visits multiplied by your conversion rate, you get your units sold. So that's how many units you actually have to sell. So if you spend $40 and your cost per acquisition is $40, well, that automatically means that you sold at least one unit. All right, so AOV, I determined this from the account itself. Again, look at your Shopify analytics and you can see what your average order value is. I would say look over a month period or so. But the more data that you have in order to see that AOV, the better. But if you at least have a goal, look over a month or 60 days or so to be able to determine that average order value inside of the Shopify metrics or basically any platform you're looking at. And then we can actually look at the ROAS of the account. So this would be the goal ROAS that we would, based upon these numbers, this would be the goal return on ad spend that we would want to hit. And so that's just AOV, your average order value, divided by your cost per acquisition. So we have a 2.5 ROAS. So if we spent $40, we made $100, and that's a 2.5 ROAS. So these are all really easy things that I calculated. Based upon the numbers that I remember from the client, their average order value was $100. And then you're basically able to just kind of set these metrics up. So CPMs, click-through rate, conversion rate, all of these are going to be numbers that you are in goals that you kind of set as prerequisites and then be able to change them from there. So now let's move on to the nitty-gritty, the really important stuff that everyone loves to talk about. And so because we have an average order value of $100 and we made one sale, that means we have a revenue of $100. And so I determined this by taking C11 units sold multiplied by the AOV itself. And so now you can see that the formulas are all set up in a way so that all I have to do is change this spend. And so let's say I change it to $100. Well, now we sold 3 units, and it's probably, so yeah, I'd say we actually sold 2.5 units, but if we just narrow it down to single numbers, 3 units, $250. So it's all based upon spend now. And so the other thing I put in here is cost. I know that just the fixed costs themselves for the product for $100 AOV was around $30 or so for the cost itself. And so we actually have a profit margin here of $70 off the top end, or we have a gross profit and then a profit margin of 70%. So this is before ad spend. This is where it's really, really important to evaluate beforehand what your actual profit margin is before ads. So this is a reasonably good profit margin to have before running any ad spend or doing any sort of marketing. And then to be able to figure out how to get these costs lower and whatnot, I would say the best profit margin, you don't really want to be lower than 50% or so. Typically when we're evaluating a client or when we're considering taking on a client, we look for at least above 50%. There might be some that can get away with 40% if it's like a really high average order value. Like a really, really high. But if you're talking, sub $100 products, at least below $60 or so. I would say definitely shoot for that 50 to 70% or so in terms of gross profit off the top end, because then that's going to help you down the road, because you also have to then subtract out that ad spend. So let's evaluate now. We have all of our numbers here. Then we're going to look at what does it actually take to make $1 million. Now that we have kind of these numbers here. All right, so let's see. It's 2.5, so I believe that would be 400,000. Yep. All right. So now we're speaking in terms of revenue. That means based upon all of these numbers here, if all these numbers remain consistent, which they won't, but again, this is goal setting, this is KPIs, and seeing, is this a viable thing? Well, if we assume a ROAS of 2.5 and the rest of these numbers, $100 AOV, that means that we need to sell at least 10,000 units in total. Now, it's really easy to break down by year. So if we take this, or by month, that means you only have to sell 833 per month. And then if we take this and assume, 30 days, that means that you have to sell at least 27.7 or 28 units per day based upon all these consistent numbers to hit $1 million. And so that means it's going to take $400,000 in ad spend. Now, obviously, that's not something that you have to. It's not something that you have to set in your mind. If you look at your account, you have to, and you say, well, that means we need to have $400,000 in order to scale to $1 million right now. Like, no, you don't have to have that right now, because again, we can evaluate based upon the month itself. And so, okay, $33,000 per month, or if we look at spend, that means that it would take around about $1,100 in spend per day based upon all of these numbers. If it took a year to make $1 million. Now, $1 million in a year isn't, a year is a long, pretty decent amount of time to make $1 million. And again, these are assuming consistent variables. But what's important about this is just to see the actual viability. Like, okay, $1,000, that's really not that much money. If it were to take $1,000 a day, that's really not that high of an ad spend. And so you can even look at it right now and say, if you have, okay, I have 20, 30, 40 grand to invest, $1,000 a day. Well, that's not that much money. And I could do that right now. And then it's just about getting that revenue and then being able to reinvest that back in to be able to get those numbers. And so this is mainly just to show you just the formula that takes place and just evaluating those numbers and how you actually scale to $1 million. Now, notice that we have cost in here. And then we have profit. So you actually don't get this. You get this. And I set this in here to show that, okay, maybe you make $1 million, but you're really only coming away with 700,000. But you're actually not coming away with 700,000. If you're looking at actual net, you're actually coming away with $300,000. But that's in just flat net revenue after the total costs here. But that's not including other costs. And this becomes very, very important, because now we have to understand, okay, now it's important to look beyond revenue and think in terms of profitability. Maybe you want to make an actual $1 million in profit. And so just here you can see $600,000, you made 1.5 in revenue, but you had about around $1 million. Let's see, what is this? So if we do 550. Yeah, around that, around $550 and $575,000 to actually make $1 million in profit off the top end, and coming away with net $431,000 off the bottom end. And again, remember, these variables, they change, and click-through rates can be much higher. And so let's take this. All right, let's throw this up. Let's say maybe we had an average of 3.5%. Holy cow, look at that. Look at how much that changed everything. I took it from 1.5 million to $2 million. And now you're coming away with a profit margin of 1.4 million, and then you're coming away with a net of $833,000. That's pretty good. And then maybe the AOV goes up a little bit. Make it 105. Well, now you're at almost $1 million just in net itself. Maybe it goes up to 120. Now you're over, you're at 1.2 million just by making like a $15 change there to AOV. You're now up over $1 million in net after all costs. This is why marketers focus so much on those dollars, right? Just on those individual dollars. And this is why you need to focus on just the individual dollars of the account. And this is why even just making a 1% change on click-through rate and a $20 difference on average order value all of a sudden puts you up over. Now let's go back to our original numbers. $100, 2.5. You're at $431,000 here. Switch those numbers, and you're at over $1 million net, right? And this isn't even assuming $1 million. This is assuming just $1 million in profit here, $400,000 and a $500,000 spend, $1,500 in spend a day. I lay all of this out to show you why marketers focus so much on just even increasing the AOV by $5 over the span of a year can make an insane difference if these variables stay consistent. And even just making a better creative to throw up the click-through rate just 0.5%, all of a sudden makes you like almost $200,000, right? Huge differences there in the click-through rate and all of those things. And, cost per click, right? Let's say we get CPMs. Let's see, cost per click, click-through rate. So, okay, so yeah, that impacted that where. But say we throw up our conversion rate, 3.5, right? Holy cow. Increasing the this is what I love. I love looking at these spreadsheets because they get me so excited to look at it. If we just increased the conversion rate by 1%, 1%, we nearly doubled the net. We nearly doubled the net income after everything is said and done with this spend of $500,000. You're coming away with almost $1 million and almost doubled it. And then it's just about increasing these numbers just ever so just slightly, finding just those better tweaks, those better ways, and just making sure all these numbers stay consistent. This is why it's so important to lay out these goals in the beginning and get all of this stuff figured out, because it's what's going to actually determine the viability and what's actually going to tell you, okay, if I want to make this much money, this is how much I have to have. This is the amount of investment that I need to put in per day. Now, there is a gradual step-by-step process to get up to that level where you're testing audiences, and maybe you're only spending $500 a day. But then when you get these consistent numbers, you have an account that's optimized. You're then able to make those gradual scales up to $1,500 a day. And remember, this is why it's a living document. It's something that changes. It's something that we're always coming back to and always plugging these numbers in and seeing what our current numbers our current numbers are, and then figuring out what needs to change in order to get this number better, or get this number better, or get this number better. All right, look at that. Even just $100,000 in revenue, $40,000, $100 a day. So simple to look at. But then it's just about taking each of these numbers, evaluating every day, every week, every month, and plugging these in as a formula. So yeah, really, really simple spreadsheet, guys. And if you want, I might drop this really simple spreadsheet down in the description below. If you want it, comment down below if you want this spreadsheet, and I will put it in the description. But honestly, this is so easy, you can build it yourself and plug in these numbers. I went through each of the formulas for you. You can see it here. You can go back and look at it yourself. But I plugged in each of these numbers here. And so if you want, watch it again, or if comment down below if you want, I can just upload it. But it's stupid simple. I plug this in with the numbers. I know all these numbers. These are numbers I look at every day in accounts. So it's easy for me just to set these up in here. But all right, so let's move on to the third thing that we evaluate when looking at how to scale to 7 figures. Hey guys, so I know that last section was a little bit crazy and a little bit long, and I know it was a lot. So I'm going to try and speed up this section for you. But thank you for bearing with me. Now, the biggest thing that we usually do when taking on a client, and when you're just evaluating a business, one of our own businesses, or whether that be a client, is understanding just having brand guidelines for that, for that company. What is, and what I mean by that, is having an actual living, breathing document that contains, it goes beyond your core values, but actually contains everything that your business lives for. And so this is, something that we do for, for clients or for our own businesses, for every single one of them. And what's important about that is to get away from the actual numbers itself and understand what the promise is of your actual company. And so it's so important to think about that, because that's what actually constructs all of the systems in your company. It's what impacts your marketing plans. It's what impacts your emails. It's what impacts what's on your website. That's what people are there for. And so getting that actually all out into, whether that be a document or whether that be, a software that you guys are using to, share amongst your employees, or you want to post it up on your wall or something like that. I'll say that ours is about 35 pages long in terms of our brand guidebook. And so just the ridiculously important thing about that is, when you're scaling to that level, you want to be able to understand, and you want everybody to understand what the unique selling proposition is, who the avatars are, and the actual benefit feature, analysis of each of those things. This is it's something that I see a lot of businesses they just don't do. It's something that it's up here, but it's not actually laid out, and it's not improved. It's not changed. Because this is something that, while it's not, directly impacting numbers, it does indirectly impact the numbers. Because I said this is a living document. It's something just like the numbers is kind of changing. It's something that we gradually learn from, but it's something that's so important for an entire company to have and be able to see. Because again, we're listing out not only those core values, but also understanding the exact path that we're trying to take, the exact promise and mission that we're trying to fulfill, and then we're able to lay all that out. And that's what's going to impact everything else. And it's what determines your offer at the time. It's so important to have that offer. I can't stress that enough. It's so dramatically important. And so to kind of, bring everything back around, those are the three, I would say, most important things. Because remember, when it comes down to scaling, it comes down to four fundamental things. It comes down to capital. It comes down to the actual personnel that you're working with. You want to have the right people working in your company, and evaluating what jobs need to be filled and whatnot, and what all needs to happen, and the right brand guidebook for the company itself to be able to figure out what actual offer do you want to have and promise, and the people involved, and then the actual timeline of the actual timelines or strategy, or the actual plan itself, and how that's executed along the way. Those are the four fundamental things for scaling ever. Those will never change. I can promise you that. And so when it comes down to it, like I said, part of what we do is actual systems and structures, but at the same time, going beyond just standard like agency work and marketing and setting up systems, is part of it is just coaching to think beyond $1 million. The reality is it's easy to make $1 million in 1 month and be broke the next month. I know I'm going to let that sink in for just a minute here, but that's the reality. It's happened 1 million times. It's not that crazy of a thing, because the reality is the $1 million is just that first stepping stone in the grand scheme of things. $1 million should just kind of be the short-term goal, but not the over the long term. That shouldn't be the goal. And as somebody who I have said is thinking in terms of finance, I have a finance background. I'm not thinking in terms of the short term. I'm thinking long-term profitability. That's where having a brand guideline book, or just brand guidelines in and of themselves, come into play. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to create long-term strategy. It's what's going to create long-term growth. That $1 million is kind of just reaching that threshold of $1 million is saying, we're no longer a hobby anymore. We're a business, because it's not a business until you reach $1 million. It's just a hobby. It's not something that is even relatively close to sustainable yet in the long term. So important to have all of those things. And this is all the things that I've said above is everything that we evaluate, everything that we take into consideration, and everything that we look at and we start up whenever beginning the process of scaling a client or a business to $1 million. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you found value in it, if you liked it, make sure that you hit that like button down below. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Thank you guys so much. Until next time.